Hello and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sosatris, and this week I wanted to talk about books that I read in college that I do genuinely still like. Alright, so these are books that I read through undergrad and grad school during my English major years, and these are the books that really stuck with me and I don't know, said something to me and sparked some kind of, I don't know, interesting thoughts. There's a lot of stuff that I read that I did not enjoy and that I'm not a huge fan of. But these are the ones that I genuinely really like. So, all right, just jumping right into it, there's kind of a lot here. Oh, and there's a cat here. Okay, hello. So the first off is Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. I read this in oddly enough, an American literature course very early on. And I was young enough at the time I didn't really get it, but I've read it since then, and it's just wonderful. This is very modernist novel, experimental, sort of stream of consciousness, looking at sort of daily life, the inner world. Yes, I know. Virginia Woolf was very much focused on sort of the inner landscape of the mind, and this is sort of an exploration of that. It's not very long, but the language is beautiful and evocative, and it's just one of those books that I don't know, it just really sticks with you, and I really enjoyed it. Next up is Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. I read this in a modernism class because this is sort of one of the earliest modernist novels. It's sort of right at the beginning, and I loved this one. This one is tense and complicated. It's kind of a horror novel. It's just tearing apart sort of the established assumptions that a lot of people had about art and about morality, and it's wonderful. The main character is sort of taken on this journey of self-destruction, and it's so much fun to see. Next up is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. I read this in it was an American literature course, and I can't remember which one it was. But anyways, this one was really fantastic. This is one of my favorite books. I love both movie adaptations of it, and although I've never seen the Broadway musical version of it, but this book is it's fantastic. It's about perseverance and inner strength and change, and there's explorations of like queer identity and racial identity, and it explores sort of how one kind of puts oneself together and forms themselves as a whole complete person with everything else kind of going on in the world. So this is just an excellent book, and I really loved it. Next up is James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I read this in the modernism class as well, and I just loved this one. It was at a time when I was sort of struggling with what I wanted to do. My entire identity at the point was just like be a student and do well and survive and make it to graduation. That's kind of the only thing that I cared about. That was my long-term goal in life, was just do that. And this one here, it's all about sort of the journey of the main character who is sort of trying to figure out what he is and what he does. And there's different sections where he says, okay, I'm going to be this person, and it doesn't quite work. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to be this person. And he keeps trying on different identities, and it's either a disaster or it just doesn't fit, and it's just, I don't know. I thought this was really interesting. Joyce is a fantastic writer, and this is probably one of his more accessible books, and I really liked it. Oh, there's a cat here. Hello. And so yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and this one holds a special place in my heart for actually getting me to think about my own future as a person. Next up is Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. This is another one of my all-time favorites. This book has the main character sort of going through a journey of self-discovery. She goes through 3 marriages, all of which are disastrous in different ways, and she kind of comes out at the end sort of stronger and more confident in who she is as a person. And it's wonderfully written, and it's beautiful. Hurston has a great knack for dialogue, and wit and humor and just the realities of life. And she's just an absolutely terrific author. Love her. Next up is William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. I read this it was a Southern literature course. And this one is definitely one that I'm glad I read in a classroom with help. Because each of the 4 sections is told in sort of a completely different style. The first one especially is very hard to get through. The main character doesn't see the world kind of the way everyone else does, and so it jumps around in time. And, you know, once you kind of get to the end, it sort of makes sense, because each successive section is sort of clearer and more conventionally written. The 4th section is sort of the most conventional. But it was a really great journey. Very Southern Gothic, you know, collapsing old Southern family. And the external collapse of everything is sort of mirrored by the internal collapse of the characters. And just really, really fantastic. Another one by Faulkner that I read in another class, but it was taught by the same instructor, was Light in August. And this one's very cinematic. I don't know how to describe it, but when you're reading it, like, you can see everything as if it's a movie. There's even like movie style transitions at times that I thought was just really, really great. This one is, it kind of explores racial issues, and I don't know, the way that he just depicts characters, it just feels like a very lived in place. And Faulkner has such a great way of writing that is just really captivating. And so I really, really loved this one. This one is very accessible. If you're looking for kind of an intro into Faulkner, I'd either say this one or As I Lay Dying. But this is a very good introduction to his work because it's I don't know, it pulls you in a really captivating way. But I really, really love this one. Next up is Laura Esquivel's Like Water for Chocolate. I read this in a feminist literature course, and this one is so great. This was sort of my introduction to magical realism. I hadn't heard anything about the genre before that, and it's dreamy, it's beautiful. The book is based around like a series of recipes, so each chapter starts with a recipe, but the recipe morphs into the action of the story. And it's wonderful. I think it was also made into a movie that I have not seen. But this one is it's so much fun. It's just, again, it's sort of a person finding where they fit in the world and facing the troubles of existence. But it's told in a really gorgeous way. And this is definitely one that I want to reread very soon, because I really like this and I want to revisit it. Now, this one isn't really a novel, but this is The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. This poem, I read this in the modernism class as well. Modernism is my favorite era. But I read this and it just, I don't know, it really spoke to me. It's a wonderful poem. The poem itself is only like a tiny part of this edition. It's like this much. But it's one of those poems that's like filled with allusions and references to other things. And it's kind of like a conglomeration of like what modernism was. It was taking the fragments of the past and trying to reassemble it into something new. It's based around, there's like the legend of the Fisher King from Arthurian legend that's kind of at the heart of this, but it's not just that, it's like modern, and it's in the past, and it's in the future, and it's everywhere, and it's just dreamy. And this is such a fun poem to dig into, because you dig in and there's so many layers. This is also the poem where I got my screen name from. There's a character in here called Madame Sosatris who shows up, and she's kind of a fortune teller with a tarot deck, and she's based off of a character from an Aldous Huxley novel, I think Brave New World, maybe. It was just, there's just so much in here, and it's one of those poems that if you ever need like a title for something, just flip through it and you'll find something, because it's just iconic. It's wonderful, and it's definitely one of my favorite works of modernist literature ever. Next up is J.M. Coetzee's Waiting for the Barbarians. I think I read this in a postmodern literature class, and this one is wonderful. It's sort of an explanation of the way that societies other people, and it's all about sort of the way that public perception shapes sort of the concept of what is an enemy. Um, it's based kind of, I guess you could say it's almost a fantasy novel because it's not based in any named world or country or anything that is known. It's sort of kept vague so you can sort of put it wherever, and I think it does that intentionally so that you are kind of aware of what biases you're bringing to it. So when you read about sort of the empire and the barbarians, you know, what do you think that is? I don't know, it's really engaging and it's really interesting. The main character is sort of a slimy character, and you kind of see his change from beginning to the end, um, where all he wants is to be sort of like a mid-level cog in this big imperial wheel, and he doesn't want to have to take any responsibility for anything. He just wants to kind of live and do his thing, and things sort of start to go badly for him. But this is really just a fantastic, thought-provoking novel, and it's really interesting, and it's short too, so if you ever want to read it, it's a quick read, but would definitely recommend. Very thought-provoking and mind-expanding. The next one's kind of controversial because I think people nowadays, their opinions of it have sort of changed. But that is The Awakening by Kate Chopin. This I read this in like a feminist literature course, and at the time I thought it was really profound and interesting. But it does end, spoiler alert, it does end with the main character sort of walking into the sea, and sort of giving up on her life because she feels like everything is stacked against her and she just doesn't feel connected to the world. But she's a mother, she has kids, and she sort of walks into the sea and just sort of chooses to relinquish responsibility for everything. This book has sort of been reevaluated over the years, and I think a lot of people take issue with her decision in the end. Because she has a family, she has kids. There's kind of this concept of like she has this responsibility to be there for her kids, and it's really selfish of her to sort of give up her life and just leave them behind. But I think that's the point. It's supposed to get you to ask questions. It's supposed to give you a visceral reaction to what she does in the end. And you have to sort of reevaluate things. It's like, what systemic problems led to a mother feeling so without hope or without a care for the future that she would do that. And so, you know, I don't think we're supposed to sympathize with the main character and be like, yes, you know, she did the right thing or she did the wrong thing. You're supposed to read this and think, how does society treat women? And this was written kind of early, what is it, 1899, so almost turn of the century. Where women had very little rights, and it was a very different world than today. So I don't know. I think this is still a really interesting book. It's a novella, and it provokes a lot of interesting conversations. I know there's this trend nowadays with young students sort of not liking books with main characters that are not like good, virtuous people. They want kind of main characters to be like heroes and good people that you can relate to. And the main character is sort of not that. She's much more complicated. She's much more real. And I don't know. This is a good story, and I think we should keep reading it. But also be aware of the historical context in which it was written, and the things that it is addressing. So I don't think we should get rid of this one because it's still worth reading. The next one is, this one's kind of interesting. This is The Piano by Jane Campion and Kate Pullinger. And this one is sort of a novelization of the movie directed by Jane Campion. And I don't know, it's really, really wonderful. The book is gorgeous, and it's kind of a work of art in its own sense. We also watched the movie that went along with this, and the movie has a very definite sort of answer at the end of what happens at the end. The book leaves it sort of up to you if it's, if it's what really happened, what are we supposed to think. It's a lot more open-ended. But I don't know, I really, really liked this one. And it's interesting that we've got kind of like a novelization based on a film, but it was written in part by the director of the film itself. But I don't know, it's interesting, and it asks a lot of deep questions. Again, issues of kind of agency, and it's got a feminist core where it's asking, the woman is what, she's like a mail order bride, and she's sort of caught up in this sort of relationship that she doesn't really want, but it gives her stability. And it's just, I don't know, I think this is definitely one that we should keep reading, and it shouldn't kind of drift away because I like it. So, but that's that one. Next up is Kindred by Octavia Butler. Octavia Butler is one of my favorite authors of all time. She's just an absolutely fantastic speculative fiction writer. She was writing in kind of, the late 70s, 80s, early 90s. And this one I read in a class. It was called Cross-Cultural American Voices, and it was all different sort of perspectives, and different cultures and stuff within kind of the American kind of bubble. And what was really interesting about this is a lot of the people in the class didn't like the book. They thought that it was sort of, I don't know, immature. They called it kind of YA-esque. And it just didn't really connect with them. So I don't know, I maybe don't understand where they were coming from, but it was really interesting. It was the first time this teacher had taught it, and I loved it. It's the story of kind of this Black woman from the 70s who gets sent back in time inexplicably, to a period in the 19th century, and she keeps jumping back and forth at different times, and it's all connected to one of her ancestors, and she's trying to figure out why she's being sent back in time, what she has to do. This book is just, it's wonderful. It's so well written. It's engaging. Butler is a terrific writer. But I'm kind of sad that it didn't connect with the class, because the teacher, I think, stopped teaching this after that. It was kind of the first time he taught it, and it didn't really go over very well. But I'm really glad that we read it in that class, because that was my introduction to Butler, and it encouraged me to read a lot of her other stuff. So, if you're out there, thank you for teaching us this book, because it was important, and I'm really, really glad that you taught it, even though everyone else in the class didn't like it, but I thought it was great. Next up, I read Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, and this one's almost become kind of a cliche since then, because there's like a TV series, and it's sort of, a lot of times it's used as kind of a buzzword in the news, and at the time, I thought it was just mind-blowing and incredible. I still like it, and I still think we should read it, but one thing I will say about this is that it's not terribly intersectional. It's very much kind of a white feminist story. So go into that knowing that, be aware kind of that. But I think this is still an interesting thing to read, because there's one chapter which is sort of a flashback where the main character is kind of going about her day, and she realizes that things have happened where she no longer has the rights that she did the day before. And it's just terrifying. And so this is definitely one we need to keep reading, but I think it's something that we need to read just so that we don't misinterpret it. It's more focused on like the loss of bodily autonomy rather than a lot of other very real issues that women of all different backgrounds sort of deal with. So, but I think it's still worth reading, and this is definitely an interesting one that we need to keep talking about. Next up is another Margaret Atwood one. I read this in a postmodernism class, and that's Oryx and Crake. It's the first book in the Mad Adam trilogy. This one is sort of a post-apocalyptic kind of speculative fiction thing where you've got sort of this virus that goes out of control and it kills most of the population of the earth. There's also genetically modified creatures and beings that sort of have taken over, and you've got the main character in this one who's sort of looking back at the events that led to all of this. The sequels, there's 2 sequels in the series, and they look at sort of different characters and different aspects of the world. Um, but this one is the one that we read in the class, and it was just, I don't know, it's really thought provoking. It's very grim, and it's really brutal in parts. In fact, the worst section is, it's not even like anything all that graphic. It's just a description of sort of the types of like video games that the main characters would play in their spare time, and some of them are just horrifying. And it's kind of meant to show sort of the sort of lack of empathy that had become commonplace. And it's, I don't know, it's really interesting and thought provoking. It's terrifying. It's weird. One thing I will say, Margaret Atwood is not the greatest at coming up with like brand names because they all sound kind of forced and goofy. But apart from that, it's really, really good and interesting, and it's sort of a play up of sort of the, Island of Dr. Moreau or Frankenstein kind of story where you've got sort of male hubris gone bad, and the disasters that come from that. But definitely would recommend this one. Last up on this list is Stephen Crane's The Red Badge of Courage. And it's funny, I kind of avoided this one for the long time because I didn't really understand what kind of story it was. This is a very brutal Civil War story that just does not shy away from kind of the brutality of war, and it doesn't glorify it in any way. As a kid, I always thought this was sort of one of those like, off to war for, patriotism and everything. And so I wasn't really that interested, but I was forced to read it in a class, and it was really fantastic. This book also led to the essay that I wrote that I was most proud of in my undergrad years, and I did a reading of this that interpreted it as a zombie novel because the main character is sort of haunted by images of the dead coming back to life and coming after him kind of throughout the book. And and I kind of took that and ran with it and talked about sort of, how this is sort of a dystopian, apocalyptic sort of book, even though it's set during the Civil War, and that wasn't. But anyways, I genuinely really like this. Stephen Crane's writing is raw and brutal and very evocative, and it really pulls you into kind of the situation of where the character is. So would definitely recommend this. It's short. This edition has two books in it. It also has Maggie, Girl of the Streets, and some other things. So it's not super long. So would recommend it. Red Badge of Courage, Stephen Crane. Definitely give it a go. With that, I will let you go. As I was going through this list, there was other books that I was like, well, I did read that one, and I did like that one as well. But if they didn't sort of jump out at me during my first scan through of everything, I figured it was okay to be like, what, we'll just leave that off the list. It was a long list anyways. But with that, I will let you go. I will see you next week. In the meantime, happy reading. And if you're in the Alberta, Saskatchewan, northern US area, and you're buried in snow right now, I will tell you the snow will eventually go away. It's fine. We are going to get spring, so don't give up. All right, with that said, I'll let you go. Bye.